Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. All right, well, it says we have audio. I'm struggling a little bit here, guys. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Still no audio in my ear, though. Testing, testing. What's going on with that? Test, test. Oh. Oh, boy. That would help. It would help if I plugged it into the right receptacle. Boy, I tell you, these life's little challenges. How's everything going, guys? Just going to get that camera fixed a little bit better there. So, welcome, folks. Good evening. Welcome to Prophecy Montana podcast. My name is Carrie. My wife will not be joining us this evening. And Reformation, how you doing? She says, we can hear you. So fantastic news. So, and the little sound bar is moving. So I'm just going to assume everything's working. So anyways, wow, what a week so far. Boy, I tell you, trials. They just come in bunches, I guess. And, it should be good news when we get trials, because that maybe is letting us know that we're doing things correctly. And, so maybe that's what's happening. Maybe I'm doing it incorrectly. We can be false martyrs. I don't know if I've ever talked about that before, but there is a false martyrdom mentality that's going along in the Christian world now. There was some quotes in Ellen White, how she said that, people would think that they're doing a service for God. And oftentimes, when God's persecution falls on us, God's persecution, God's judgments, I should say, we construe it as persecution oftentimes. And so, I don't want to be that guy. So it's always nice to remain humble and to be able to question everything and what we're doing in our direction, and to constantly examine it and have it under examination, because especially in these last days, we can get, things can go sideways for us and not necessarily in a good way. Persecution is good for the saints because it's something that God allows to edify us and to strengthen us. And it's also an indication that, that the devil hates what we're doing and that we're doing the right thing. All who live godly will suffer persecution, the Bible tells us. But again, some of us have fallen under God's judgments and have misconstrued it as persecution. So, well, enough of that. Let's pray real quick. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this opportunity to witness on your behalf, and we just pray that your Spirit will be present with us this evening as we do so. And as we open your word, Lord, guide us through these words that you have spoken many years ago, that you have given us as a guide. In your name we pray, amen. So, all right. So, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about. First of all, the title of, I don't know if I put it on my title, but we were going to talk about the alligator Alcatraz. And I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but it's an internment camp, a prison camp, some kind of a detainment camp for the illegal immigrants that have come into this country. And it's supposedly for all the criminals, these bad criminals out there that we're trying to catch. And a word on that in a minute, too. I think I spoke a little bit about the criminal activity and the criminality of these illegal immigrants. And there has been much rhetoric heaped upon us in the news that have suggested that a good many of these individuals are indeed, some kind of, Middle East factions, militant groups, and even cartel members and the like. Well, let me explain something to you. The cartel has got oodles and oodles of money, and they don't need to sneak people across the border. There are people coming across the border smuggling drugs. That is a thing, but generally speaking, they'll get somebody who's super desperate, who's just trying to pay us coyote fee, and they'll say, well, here's a way out of the coyote fee, because generally, I don't know what the coyote fees are nowadays, but years ago, it was like $1,000, and to a Mexican, that's a lot of money if they're trying to raise the money in Mexico, because some of these people are making literally $1 a day. And certain parts of Mexico. I mean, there's better parts and there's worse parts in Mexico. It's just like any kind of a country, and but with the structure and the way it works, there are some very poverty-stricken areas that are beyond our comprehension, and so this money that they're trying to raise is a significant amount of money, and so. But in order to pay that off, the cartels figured out that they can take advantage of people's situation, and they can offer them these kind of deals, and so they put a backpack on their back to give them a little bit of water, and off they go. And oftentimes these people die in the desert, and their skeletons are found with a backpack full of dope. And more often than not, that's actually what happens. And I've witnessed this personally myself, where because I've lived in California, and let me see how. Okay, here we go. Okay, looks like Dallas might have joined us. He just sent me a text. Okay, well, Dallas, if you're listening, I'm going to give you a call right after the live, and we can chat about some of those things. But I think it's God's ministry is under attack. I feel like and a lot of things are really kind of falling on us in many different ways. But God always reigns victorious, and that's the thing that we have to continually keep in the forefront of our mind. And that's the promise that He gives us. And so we hang tight, and we endure. We pray for endurance. We don't pray for them to go away, because then whatever work that trial is to do with us and in our heart, we've circumnavigated it by doing things like that. So, but anyways, but yeah, so these immigrants are taken advantage of, and so they smuggle drugs. And I think this is probably what was pointed out, by Donald Trump and some of the rhetoric that was coming across in the right wing party, and what they were claiming, that all these criminals are coming over. Well, the actual cartel members have easy access to America, and they have nothing but money, and they have green cards. And in fact, many of them have become police officers, and this was evident in when we were living in King City. I told you guys some of the story and some of what was taking place over there. And there was cartel members that were actually being shipped over to America and going through becoming U.S. citizens and joining the military and getting training, either through police academy or even, as high up even as the FBI. And they were infiltrating all of these agencies, if you will. And, not only for the purpose of infiltration and aiding in the smuggling of drugs, but also for the purpose of going back and actually teaching the troops, if you will, the tactics of the Marine Corps, et cetera, for a lot of the dangerous things that, obviously they're up against. And so if the U.S. military ever goes down there, they, and plus they've hired agencies like Blackwater and mercenary groups and stuff like that to protect the empire. And that's exactly what these cartels have become, is literal empires. And they pretty much run whole countries down in Mexico, whole states down in Mexico. And they pave the city streets. Okay, why am I saying all this? Well, so, the alligator Alcatraz has been, proposed, and, Governor DeSantis has agreed to foot the bill for the time being, and then later it would be agreed upon that he would be reimbursed these funds to build this area where they can house the illegal immigrants. I don't know why they just can't send them back to Mexico. I think that would be cheaper than trying to house them. I mean, see, nothing really makes sense when, but people are buying this nonsense, and they're buying this idea that, okay, yeah, so we need to build this place to keep all these immigrants, because if we don't, then we're not going to follow through with the plan to deport all of these terrible criminals. And so this is going to house around 5,000 people, but there's like 50,000 illegal immigrants and detained currently. So I don't really see how 5,000, extra beds is really going to make that big a difference, especially if they're in the process of deportation anyways. So I question all of what's taking place and happening, as we all should. And it was suggested to me, I got a phone call from Mike, and hi if you're watching, or later on if you're watching, Mike Brown from Browning, and he threw some interesting perspectives. Now he's always looking for Sunday law stuff, as am I. But sometimes people will give you fresh perspective. Now this alligator Alcatraz, it was even suggested that it could be used as an additional internment camp for possible dissenters of the Sabbath laws, Sunday laws, i.e. And so, and that's very true. And this goes on to my next topic, which is, what was this? Illegal actions through actions supported by the masses. All right. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you take, for example, let's use one example here, and hopefully I can make my point, because I've tried to make this example before, and maybe I didn't come across quite right with it, because it almost sounds like I'm supporting criminal activity. But just hear me out, and listen very carefully with what I'm saying here. All right. So, for example, everybody hates pedophilia, right? And everybody hates the pedophile because they prey on our little children. And I've had some experiences with some pedophiles in the church, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So, but have you guys seen these sting operations where they go in and they bust these guys looking to have, relations with younger people? And but here's the thing, and they don't actually catch them in a crime. All right. And here's where you need to pay attention, because a lot of people would support this activity by the police, myself included, to up until a certain degree. It's almost like when you watch Barnaby Jones or Starsky and Hutch, and I don't know what kind of police programs they had overseas, but where the good cop breaks the law, if you will, to catch the bad guy. He will pick the lock, so he doesn't need a search warrant. He's having trouble getting a search warrant. The bad guy's kind of circumnavigating all the laws and everything, and so they need to gain access to the building, and they can't do it unless, he comes in after hours, he picks the locks, he sneaks around there, finds what he needs, and out he is. And then, and so, and everybody cheers, right? That the cop just violated this man's rights to the nth degree. And so this is what we're seeing. We've been prepped for it early on. And, and I used to watch a program called the Dukes of Hazzards when I was a kid, and I saw nothing wrong with it. Well, the problem is, the Dukes of Hazzards really kind of focused on illegal activity being good and the law being bad, right? And the law basically was a bunch of jokers that would chase these good old boys around, in their General Lee car, and they'd go jumping over jumps and everything to get away from the cops. And they would, of course, where they live, so why don't they just go to the house instead of, whatever. It was a program. And, Waylon Jennings would sing this song, just the good old boys never meaning no harm. And so they weren't meaning no harm. They were just breaking the law. But it's okay for cops to break the law as long as it's for a good reason. And so my point is this, is they're breaking the law because you can't legally put a child as the bait to lure these guys in. Whoever's on the other end of the phone, whoever's on the other end of the keyboard is not a minor. You follow me? You see where I'm going with this? They're circumnavigating certain legal avenues through the mass, what's the word? Through the, I'm missing a word here, and it's going to really haunt me. To try and get the approval of the masses. And because these people are terrible people, they are going to use any means necessary to be able to bust them. But when you go to court and you actually, go down before law, well, these people never actually committed a crime. I get it. The intent was there, right? Intent is 9/10 of the law, but they never actually committed a crime because the individual that was baiting them had to be of legal age. Are you guys following where I'm coming from this? And so with this alligator Alcatraz, the same thing's happening with these deportations is, these masked men, first of all, their identity is completely, hi, Tim, how you doing? Glad you joined. But their identity is completely masked. There is no, identification tags. And these are all required in standard law enforcement, right? You should be able to ask a an officer's name and badge number, and there's reasons for that legally, and I don't understand all the reasons, but there's reasons for that, and almost all precincts in America have these rules, you know, and but the idea that their faces are hidden, that they're going in without search warrants, and supposedly they don't need search warrants because these aren't U.S. citizens, right? And you know there is some technicalities that can get you around all of that, but then there's not, and the U.S. Constitution is being violated in so many ways that you know. And I read some Bible verses last week about this, but anyways, they're breaking laws to bring about this justice, this form of justice that has been spun to the people. It's a very clever way of getting laws changed. Now, a lot of times, and I'm not an expert in communism either, but I kind of know that the beginnings of communism is usually some kind of an outcry. You know, they create an issue, an outcry, and then all of a sudden the people want to rise up. And so they use this righteous indignation from the people to go forth and then carry out their plans. Of course, propaganda is all involved in this, you know, and make no mistake, there's tons of propaganda involved with what's going on right now. And I didn't want to get too far off on the illegal immigration thing, but I just want people to start thinking, like, why are they doing what they're doing? You know, these are circumnavigations of law, and you don't think they're going to do that when the Sunday law comes along? I mean, they're going to use these same tactics, these same exact tactics because these are going to be illegal actions. I mean, there's laws that protect people here in America anyways, and probably Australia and, you know, many of the European countries too. Canada, I know, that protect people from religious persecution, especially by the U.S. government or whatever government that there may be that's, you know, doing the persecution. So, but they just need to get around those, and that all works out through propaganda and everything else. So we got to be careful with what we're listening to when we listen to the news. You know, it's amazing how our minds begin to work again when we turn the news off. And so this brings up, you know, and Satan is killing us by 1,000 cuts. You've heard death by 1,000 cuts. You guys might have heard that terminology. Well, this is what's happening. It's a total onslaught, like Walter Wythe famously, you know, used to coin, and still does. You know, it's a total onslaught. It's an attack from all directions, literally. And when you look at our children, you know, they're being attacked 12 different ways. They're being attacked by music. They're being attacked by video games, you know, the culture, they go to school and they're being taught things, you know, evolution and this progressivism and it just goes on, right? And of course, the breakdown of the middle class, the breakdown of the family. You know, you can see remnants of broken down middle class there in Chicago, and it goes on and on. Right? And so if they can break down the family, they can get to the kids. If they can get to the kids, they can change them in just a few generations. And the change happens faster than we would like to think. I know my generation was... Sounds like rain. Maybe rain, maybe not. Anyways, my generation, you know, Gen X, was under attack. We were raised basically by, you know, we were the product of the hippie revolution here in America anyways. I know it happened in like England and other places too, so we weren't the only people. And of course, France has always been super progressive. And so you have these, you know, but America would lead the world for at least a little while in Christendom. And now we're trailing the world, and we seem to be leading in this immoral movement. And so, but this brings us to the church and the church in distress. And why is the church in distress? Well, because again, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, Satan has attacked every other avenue out there. Now he's attacking the church. Now, I sent that last video up. That last video was about a month and a half old. So that was recorded a month and a half, 2 months ago. And it needs to be noted because I haven't done any recording since. And that was a video that I kind of held off on. Well, we were busy for one, and I didn't post it right away. But then, you know, I had it all ready to go, and I didn't make it go live for quite a while. And I wanted to do that so I could be ready to kind of rebut some of the comments that I knew would take place. And we've had, you know, 20 some comments on there. And Some people support the reallocation of tithes and some people don't. And did I mention tithe yet? Okay, well, if I didn't already, there it is. And so there was a lot of talk about the tithes and where the tithes should go. Now, I'm not here to tell people where to put their money. That's not my purpose here, okay? I'm just going to tell you what I think the Bible says, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't consider myself the final say, and I certainly don't consider myself like intelligent enough to be any kind of a leader, although I do have a platform here on YouTube and I do express my opinions, but I invite people to quickly rebut those opinions if they see anything wrong with them. And so it's under like peer review, if you will. And I think that's a safe way to say things when you know, especially when you're under peer review. Now, of course, Malachi 3:15 is that famous verse, and we even see it on our tithe envelopes, that states how we should bring in the tithes into the storehouses and see if God won't open the windows of heaven and pour out such a blessing that we can't receive it all. And of course, the storehouses is the big debatable topic, right? And what are the storehouses? Now, we know from history, church history, and I know there'll be some kickback on this too, because we've been talking about Israel as well a lot, and Israel and prophecy. And I don't think the state or the land itself has anything to do with the actual prophecy. It's utter ridiculous to think so. It never did have anything to do with the lands here on this earth, on this sinful earth. The lands that God had promised the Israelite then, back in the Old Testament, was typology of the promised land in heaven that we will inherit ultimately. The peoples were a typology of God's end day people, or his people that really, because Israel was to be made up of all nations. It wasn't only supposed to be just the bloodline specifically through Abraham, but all who were faithful were counted as Abraham's seed. We see this with the mingling of the different peoples. When they came out of Egypt, that's a good example, because many of them had Egyptian wives and husbands. And so it's arguable, they traveled 40 years in the desert. And so many of those people didn't even make it into the promised land. And Moses himself didn't make it into the promised land. We read that in Hebrews 11, where it talks about how they had this promise of, well, let's just go there, because they had a promise of these things, but they hadn't received it yet, right? And so Hebrews really kind of brings out what the purpose of these promises actually meant. Got to wait a second here. It's trying to load. Yeah, I tell you, there's a heaviness in my heart for a way a lot of our people are going nowadays. And I don't like to, where was I going? Hebrews. Okay, hang on. Let's see here. Hebrews. Okay, so Hebrews chapter 11. Let's just go there. Now, faith is a substance. This is the famous chapter that we all know, right? Or we should. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith, we understand, and here's the emphasis, it's on faith, right? It's not about genealogy, it's not about bloodline. Through faith, we understand that the worlds are framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made by things which do appear. By faith, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and by it he being dead yet speaketh. Okay, by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not found because God had translated him. For before his translation he had this testimony that he pleased God. But without faith it is impossible to please him. Did you hear that? Without faith. Okay. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek them. By faith Noah, being warned of God of things not yet seen, moved with fear. There's another sermon right there. I don't preach sermons, but if I did, that would be the sermon right there. Moved with fear. Prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. Reformation here popped up a comment. They knew when to expect the promise of inheritance. They have been told 430 years, Galatians 3:17, 18, Genesis 12:4. We're going to read that in just a sec. I think I know where that's going. By faith he sojourned in a land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in the tabernacle, with Isaac and Jacob, and heirs with him of the same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And what? Wait a minute here. What are we talking about? We're not talking about something on earth, are we? Through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged faithful and who had promised. Okay? Namely, Jesus gave the promise, right? That she would afterwards bear a child. That was a child of promise, not a child of bondage, but a child of promise. Because Hagar had no choice. She was a bondwoman. She had to have Abraham's child, right? Therefore sprang there even of one of him as good as dead, as many as the stars of the skies in multitude, and as the sands which by the sea of the shore are innumerable. These all died in faith, not having received the promises. They were promised, weren't they? And now they've died, right? But having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. That's another interesting, there's a lot in here, right? Are you guys getting it? For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country. Listen, folks, listen. That is at heavenly, wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from whence he also received him in a figure. And that's more typology too, right? That's what it just said. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel, gave commandment concerning his bones. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because there they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. We read a little bit about that last week. By faith, I think that was a Sabbath school lesson, actually. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than in treasures in Egypt, for he had the respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not for fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood. Okay, by faith passed through the Red Sea. By faith walls of Jericho fell. By faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. And what shall I say more? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, and of Barak, and of Samson, and of Jephthah, and of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of the weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, and yea, moreover, in bonds and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword, were wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. There's a better promise. That's what it's saying. There's something else beyond. Let's go to Reformations here. There's something else beyond this. There's a land that has been promised to Israel. Reformation gave us Hebrew 11:9. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacle with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of him with the same promise. Yeah, okay. So, and again, that goes back to the typology that I was talking about. There was given a land of promise, but they lost that land because it was conditional. You can read that in Deuteronomy. And if they were to violate the conditions, they were to be exiled from the land. And God even told them in Deuteronomy that that's exactly what they would do, okay? That they would be scattered abroad all throughout the earth. And to your point, probably all of us have that bloodline in us, so we can go either way with that and probably be right about it, But it was really never about a bloodline, because we're all cursed under the curse of Adam. But under the curse of the second Adam, or under the blessing of the second Adam, we all received life. And so let's go to Galatians 3:17 here. Galatians, that was the first one you gave me. 3:17. Okay. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before of God in Christ, the law, which was 430 years after, cannot disannul that it should make the promise of none effect. For if the inheritance be of the law, it is no more a promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. Wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. And now a mediator is not a mediator of one, but God is one. Is the law then against the promises of God? God forbid, for if it had been a law given, which could have given life, verily righteousness should have been given by the law. And there was a lot contained in that law, obviously, right? There was and it goes on to talk about how it was our schoolmaster, and wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. And this goes back again to typology. The law, the law in the covenant, the law in typology, in the keeping of the Sabbaths, plural, which a lot of people confuse for Sabbath, the Sabbath, and these were feast days. These were laws of washing and of cleanliness and of tithe and of cumin and spices, and there was all kinds of things that was contained in the law, right? And all of these had certain meanings and significances that even I don't understand them all. But I do know that they were all pointing towards Christ. But afterwards would come Jesus. And because it says, for as many of you that have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither made male nor female, for ye are all one in Jesus Christ. And if you be Christ, then you be Abraham's seed, and heirs according to the promise. That's a pretty plain verse right there. And that's probably where you were leading. Let me see here. All right, so, hang on, you got another one here. So Genesis 12:4, okay, that was probably the promise that was given. Hebrews 11:9, by faith he sojourned. Yep, we got that one. This means that from the time when Abraham first talked with God, age 75, Genesis 12:4, to the giving of the Ten Commandments was 430 years. The law existed way before Sinai. Yes, it did. Yes, to your point, it absolutely 100% did. But that was that was the law of commandments. But this law here was added because of sin. We just read that. It was added because the people, when he came down to give the law of the Ten Commandments, the people were engaged in sexual immorality. And so God gave them a schoolmaster, right? Gave them something additional to keep them on course. And they said that all these things that you have told us to do, we will do. But yeah, the law that we're talking about here, like Abraham was commanded to be circumcised, that circumcision did not exist before that. But because of Abraham's choice to have a child with the bondmaiden, God wanted to make it plain that those who followed him would cut the flesh off to signify, and we've talked about this before, to signify that the promised one would not come through the efforts of mankind. The law existed, okay, let me finish reading. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge and my commandments, my statutes and my laws, which means it wasn't just for the Israelites. Oh, okay, all right. See, I was all defensive. I didn't need to be. Because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments and my statutes and my laws, which means it wasn't just for Israelites. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so yeah, we're on the same page. Because basically, and that does delineate between the different types of the laws, because there was the commandments, the statutes, the laws. and not all of those were done away with. People like to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but for example, there was laws, and Pastor Tom had pointed this out once upon a time, which I thought was brilliant, but there was laws concerning balconies, having balconies on your roof. Somebody fell off your roof and they were injured because of that. That was that you were liable for that because you had to have that balcony on there, and it was actually written in the law. And that's parts of the law are good parts. That's good law, right? I mean, you just can't like create a trap where your neighbor falls into it and be blameless for it. There was laws concerning that of cleanliness, the bearing of human waste. We still practice that to this day. That wasn't nailed to the cross. There's laws of health. That's why Adventists talk about health a lot, because we don't believe any of those were nailed to the cross. The laws of the clean and the unclean foods. But we take it a little bit further because we think that because of the Elijah message, and a lot of you guys probably haven't heard the Elijah message yet, but the Elijah message is it starts us out in Sinai, talking about in Sinai how God gave them a diet of manna, right? It was a meat-free diet, but they required meat. They wanted meat. They begged God. They said, "Oh, that we were, in Egypt and partaking of the flesh pots," and so God did give them fowl, and and they paid the price for it too, right? But the ideal diet was basically a vegetarian diet, the bread from heaven, right? Elijah too, before he was translated, would eat bread with the widow. Remember that? And of course the three worthies, they requested pulse and not any of the portions of the king's diet, and it's spattered all throughout the Bible, so you can find it pretty easily. But for those who are looking, there's going to be a lot of resistance on some of these things, and I don't know why people resist it, because it's really something that's been proven over the years to be healthier and better, and something that makes us wiser. 10 times wiser is what the wise men were. And so, I mean, imagine how dumb I was before I became a vegetarian. No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, so this is something that God has given us to enrich our lives, not to bring it under some kind of subjection. So, but okay, so now Israel is all peoples, right? Israel was also a body. Israel was also an organization. There was tithes being paid to, well, first of all, it was Melchizedek. That's the beginning of where we read about tithes, right? And Melchizedek was an interesting character. Some believe that he was actually one of Noah's sons, Seth himself, and so Shem, I'm sorry, not Seth, Shem, of Noah, that was actually the Melchizedek spoken of there in early on in the Bible, where Abraham paid tithe to. And Melchizedek would have been a priest, but he wasn't of the Levites. Of course, the Levites hadn't been born yet, but they were a tribe that was dedicated to the service of God. But the Christ, hang on here. Well, they did have the cattle and the sheep, and were commanded to eat of the sacrifice. That's correct. So they were not commanded to be vegetarian. No, they weren't totally veg. Well, okay, that's a good point. Yeah, and somebody else brought that up too. They were commanded to eat that during Passover, which was once a year, right? And so, but that again was typology, which was done away with at the cross. But there was also typology in their diet that would then afterwards, because they were entering into the promised land. Remember, all of this has like a setting of typology. Of course, the promised land is what we are all looking forward to. The Egypt was our past lives. We understand all this stuff, right? And the diet was very important before they entered into the promised land, before they entered into Canaan. And they weren't commanded after they entered into Canaan to continue on that diet, but this was the typology that God had given them. And Elijah and the three worthies and so on and so forth. And so it's a personal choice, not salvation issue one way or the other. Well, here's the thing. I think it might have even been you, Reformation, that had said that anything can become a salvation issue, right? And I'm not going to be the one to say it, but I will say that the prophet has commanded us, and this goes, I know not everybody believes in Ellen White either, that's fine. If you're not there, that's fine. But there was a commandment that was given to her. I say commandment. I got to be careful because I don't want to make her equal with the Word of God, but I think she complements the Word of God. I think there's plenty of proof in the Bible. Okay, Jesus fed them fish after the cross. Yes, that's all true, and that's an argument a lot of people bring up. But here's the problem with that: it didn't. Why is God commanding His children not to eat the flesh of animals now? That's the question that needs to be asked, because Elijah was not a vegetarian his whole life. He was only a vegetarian up until the very last, when he lived with a widow. And so he was a vegetarian for he only ate bread, and because there was a famine in the land. And so he only ate bread right before his translation. And so there's consideration in what I'm saying here. E.G. White did not consider fish meat, and she ate it right up until about 5 years before she died. Okay, well, I'll have to be showed proof of that. I'm not certain, because she was brought fish one time and asked if they should give it to the people, because it was clear to them that fish was meat. And she said, yes, give the fish to the people. It's food, because they had not been taught about the vegetarian diet. And, there was a lot of people who were going overboard with the vegetarianism to their own destruction, apart from the counsel that Ellen White had given, especially concerning, milk and eggs and cheese and things cheese, she said, don't eat. But there were some other things that she said, don't abstain from these things until the very last. And she also made the comment how our diets would be more abundant. There'd be a more abundant supply of things in the last days, where we would be able to completely abstain from even eggs and the flesh of animals, including fish and stuff like that. Now I don't want to be a hypocrite. I do eat a little bit of fish, okay? I will outright say that right now. But, there has to be an understanding of what was being said. And I don't want to say, well, I eat fish, therefore everybody should eat fish. And I don't eat fish very often, because it feels so heavy to me. I know that's a strange thing to say. When I used to eat a lot of meat, the fish didn't feel heavy at all. It felt very light. It felt like too light, like it wasn't enough. Now it just feels like a big brick in my stomach, and it just really is a lot. But that's just me, right? So, but what she was saying was, yes, we're to abstain completely from animal products, 100%. And it really goes like this. I mean, it's not something that we should really try to defend all that much, because if, it is something that we should just study for ourselves to see if it is what God wants us to do. And if it is what God wants us to do, we should just be obedient and just do it, and that's the way I kind of look at it. Now there's some things that I could defend, with cleverness. I could defend a lot of things that I do, and I could use the Bible to do it. But if I'm being honest, I really have to kind of submit myself to God, and again, this is all peer reviewed, right? Like what I'm saying is not the final word. And Reformation here said, we cannot feed them all, but will you please get us dried codfish and dried fish of any description? Yeah, that's the one I was talking about too. Nothing canned. This will give a good relish to the food. Letter to Willie in 1895. Or maybe that's a different one. I don't know. But there was one that was talking about fish, and the fishermen had caught the fish, and they said, what do we do with the fish? Because the people are, we don't want to feed them any meat. And but then she commanded, yes, do feed them. And she'd also requested that somebody eat chicken soup, and that they would feel better, and that would heal them after she was given the health message. So again, whoopsie daisy, I did not mean to put that up. Okay, let's take that down. Get back to the comments here. So there was that, and of course in third world countries we're not going to command people to, abstain from meat if that's the only food they have. I mean, we have to be like well-rounded in our message, you know, and we don't just, you know, people that come in through our church doors, that's not the first thing we tell them, you know, oh, you got to give up the meat. I mean, there has to be balance in all that we do. You know, the first thing you do is you lead them to Jesus, you get them to fall in love with Jesus, and everything else is just follows after that. Hi, all. I was driving and listening. I'm vegan for the animals. They are sentinel beings. In the beginning, God gave Adam and Eve all the food from the garden. Just my opinion. That's all. And that's another good point. These are sentinel beings. They have been given to mankind for the caring. And when you really look at the meat industry, let's look at because when people talk about, like, for example, alcohol, right? And how Jesus drank wine, and they'll put a lot of verses up to support their view of drinking alcohol. Well, when you look at the ethicalness of drinking alcohol, I mean, you very quickly see that it's not ethical to tell people to do that, and it's you know, it's provable just in observation, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Okay, Reformation. After the flood is when God gave permission to eat meat, and the Bible never recorded a revocation of that, Genesis 9:3. Well, I beg to differ. Now, we were talking a little bit about present truth, and if you do believe in present truth, and you do believe that God has sent us a prophet, then we have to conclude that yes, we have been commanded to not do that. And with the typology in the Bible, it does fit. There are a number of people with IBS and other bowel disorders that cannot eat the vegetarian food, and it is like poison to their systems. However, they can digest the meat with no issues. I've heard this. I have heard this, and this is anecdotal, because I've spoke with doctors that have said the exact opposite is actually true. We have had a neighbor up here that claimed to have had to only eat meat. Now, he wasn't an Adventist. He didn't know anything about Christianity. But he would just eat only meat. And he died a young man. He just died not that long ago. But I wonder if he'd had, you know, and some people do this because they just simply like the taste of meat, and they come up with all these different reasons. Yeah, new wine versus old wine. Yeah, going back to what I was saying about the alcohol. It's easily provable in the Bible, but there are some verses in there that kind of give people trouble. And so if you look at the efficacy of drinking alcohol, you very quickly come to the conclusion that, you know, God's not putting his stamp of approval on alcohol. And so Last Trumpet said, agreed, Trish. Yeah, and Bart would be another one that would vie for the animals. And so, okay, going back to the animals. There's a movie out there called Slaughterhouse. And if you're a meat eater, you should eat it, because you should see how, you know, the animals are treated. Now, years ago, we had farms, but see, we haven't always been commanded to abstain from meat, like I've said before. You know, in the farm setting, and I've watched farmers do this. I've watched the Mexicans. They used to buy the goat. You know, if you guys' stomach is queasy, don't listen to what I'm saying. But they used to buy the goat and from the farmer, and I've watched this with my own eyes, how they do it. And the whole family lays hands on the goat, and they pet the goat. And did I just arrive in a vegan chat? Well, kind of. Hang in there. Don't get crazy. We're not teaching the militant vegan crazy whack job stuff that's going on right now. So just to clarify, but if you take the okay, so the Mexicans, they would buy the goat and they would lay their hands on the goat, right? And they would stroke it and they would talk softly to it in Spanish, right? And this goat would just fall asleep. It would literally just fall asleep. I mean, they had this thing hypnotized, and they were just talking to it, and this goat was totally calm. And he took a nice sharp knife and just poke, and the goat would jump a little bit, and they, oh, it's okay, and they would pet it, and of course the woman would catch the blood, and so this goat would pass away very peacefully. like not even really know what's going on, just get sleepy and close its eyes. That was the end of the goat's life. And I thought, wow, what a great way to harvest your meat, right? Okay. And this was a common practice. Um, uh, since I'm actually a vegan, I might need some clarification on that last statement, LOL. Okay. I don't know which last statement I was talking about, like one of those militant vegans. We're definitely not militant vegans. We don't go slapping chicken sandwiches out of people's hands. I think, and we're vegetarians because we believe that God has commanded us in these last days to be so. But we have to be well-rounded. We have to be of a mindset that not everybody in the whole wide world can become vegan for reasons of availability of vegetables. I mean, there's third world countries, where they raise animals literally to eat them, and we have to be like have common sense. But here in America, we're fat, right? And many first world countries, we're fat. And the processes by which they butcher animals is absolutely abhorrent. And it should be considered, even if we're not part of those people who are vegan only because of the animals, which people really do need to consider that. I'm not a vegan. I'm a vegetarian. I think vegans do without cheese and milk and stuff like that. I'm a vegetarian, I guess you could say, but for purposes of multiple different reasons. Because one, it's the animals are treated terrible. I mean, when you see the cow, I used to be, participant of people who do the brandings and stuff like that. And we used to brand the cow and cut their nuts off and all these other things. And so, all right, hang on. Race Lever says, I'm an agnostic vegan anarchist, but the Bible is quite clear that things like humans ending each other and humans devouring animals is fallen behavior as the result of sin entering. Well, thank you for that. That's actually spot on. It is. And someone had pointed out earlier that the flood was when God had given man animals to eat, but he had clean and unclean, right? He had things that were set aside to eat and animals that were set aside to avoid. And so, Christians have forgotten that nowadays too. And so, but sin entering in, I mean, we were never designed to kill animals. Our diet was plant-based. In fact, after the fall, God gave us the herb of the field. We were only to eat from trees originally. I'm not saying eat from trees because that would have been an incomplete diet once the tree of life was taken from, the earth. But the eating of the herbs gave us something a little bit more that we needed, and of course, seeds and stuff like that too. So we are a plant-based diet, not vegan. Okay, good clarification there, Tim. The provision was because after the flood, the lush land was gone, and the gardens had to be grown again. So the only thing to eat was animals until the plants can be produced again. And so here's another little, here's another little something to think about. That the lifespan of people were much longer. They lived to be 900 years old. And right after the flood, after God gave man flesh to eat, then it dropped to 120, almost overnight. And so Ray says, have you ever seen the conspiracy documentary? If not, you should seek it. You'll likely find it interesting. Christ-spiracy? Christ-spiracy? Chris-spiracy? I said conspiracy, but you're saying Christ-spiracy? Okay, yeah, maybe I'll check that out. If it's about, can you give us a quick kind of a synopsis and a few words maybe of what it is? But at any rate, so the diet was given to man after the flood. The years dropped significantly, and here we are at the end of time, and we have been once again given the diet for several reasons, I believe, and one of them might just be because God is saying, "Hey, here's the thing." You guys are going to be getting ready for translation. You're not going to be eating meat in heaven. We're not going to be chasing chicken down, trying to make chicken McNuggets out of them. Whoops. Okay, in Genesis 18:8, Reformation says, Jesus partook of the food Abraham gave him, and he took butter and milk and the calf which he had dressed and set it before him, and he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. And again, that's all true. That's all true. That's not the enemy of what I'm saying, though, because what I'm saying is man was not commanded to be vegan or vegetarian or meatless or animalless not up until the very end, because that's how the typology fits. Okay, and Ray says it's about Jesus being a vegan or a vegetarian. Well, that's not accurate. Jesus ate fish, and he, like Reformation just pointed out, ate probably cow and butter and milk and all those things when he visited Abraham. And this was Jesus when this gets deep. But you remember the statement that Jesus had said, he says, before Abraham was, I am. And the Pharisees, picked up stones because he said, you being a man have made yourself God. Of course, he was God, so he could say that. But he said, but before he said that, he said, okay, well, Ray says it can't say not accurate when you haven't even watched it. Fair. Okay, fair. Watch first with an open mind, contest later. Okay, I shall. Okay, so it's called Christspiracy. Can you do me a favor, Race? I know this is asking a lot. You probably just joined the live here. But can you actually email me a link to that? And I will actually click on that, and I will watch it. Maybe I'll comment on the next live or something like that. But you're right. Need to watch things before I comment on them. But Reformation said Isaiah prophesied that Jesus would eat butter, curds, and honey to help him know good. Eat butter, honey to help know good. Isaiah 7:15. Okay. All right. So I think that's a rebuttal to what Race was saying there. But at any rate, we got off on a little bit of a tangent here about that, but it is true. I mean, it's something to consider, and especially the way they process animals nowadays. And we were talking about the tithes in the church. Last trumpet says meat was also given to the curb out lifespans to help hasten the Lord's coming and to get over with sin faster. Tim Grady says vegetarians are deist religions. Vegan, vegetarian are deist religions. Okay. Maybe you could elaborate on that, Tim. I know a lot of Buddhists are like vegetarians. There's some, probably the Krishnas, the Hare Krishnas. I don't know. But anybody who believes in reincarnation, basically, I think that's the premises with all of that. But anyways, what do you guys think about the tithes and the allocations of tithes? We've spoken about this almost ad nauseum, so I do apologize. But there was so many comments on there that I felt like I need to at least give people a little bit more of a chance to elaborate on some of this stuff. The allocations of tithes. Now, tithe is giving of 10%, and I don't agree with everything in the documentary. Also, that guy's comments wasn't valid rebuttal to what I was saying, actually. And Reformation says the big vegan push now is because of the mindfulness movement. Well, here's the thing. Why would, and I say this because it's a question you guys need to really think about. Why would God, and Trish says, Tim Grady, vegan is not my religion. That is an odd comment. Okay. And maybe he's meant, to his defense, maybe he meant something else. Give him a second to clarify here. Yeah, and it's not my religion either. I think it's good for my health, and that's why I do it. And I think it's something that God has commanded us to do in these last days. And even if he doesn't, there's lots of lots of things to prove that a vegetarian diet is much healthier. It's ethical. We just talked about the animals. Why would we want to pay for somebody else to kill our animals? Tithes are God's are God's business. And that's a good comment, Spunky, because here's the thing. That's why I never wanted to, okay, Ray says, when did being sane enough to not kick puppies become a religion? Well, okay, yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be hurting animals. I mean, we're the caretakers of the animal world, right? Okay. Adam and Eve weren't hurting animals. But again, at the time of the flood, it was commanded that men should eat animals, eat the flesh of animals, because there wasn't anything else there. So, or when did saying fruits and vegetables are good for you become a religion? Okay. So as far as tithes and offerings go, sorry guys, the whole diet thing is always like charged, isn't it? and Trish agrees with you, Race. And so as far as the tithes and the tithes and offerings go, now I've said it before, I don't want to tell anybody where to put their money. That's between you and God. If God gives you some, if he's influencing you to give those tithes to the church, give them to the church. If he's influencing you to give them somewhere else, I don't want to be the one to tell you not to. Reformation says the devil has a counterfeit for everything that God has. I feel vegan push is part of that. Before, the mindfulness and health message was ours. Now the health message has become twisted. Okay, let me explain that. I was just going to explain that, and I kind of lost my train of thought there for a sec. Let me explain what's going on, Reformation. Now, the devil has hijacked the message, obviously, right? He's hijacked a lot of things that Christians own. And so he's taken that and he's made it filthy. And he's tied us with a group of people that are militant, that do go around slapping the chicken sandwiches out of people's hands, and it gives the vegan vegetarian movement a bad name. And who brought about this movement? None other than the Seventh-day Adventists. Right after the Great Disappointment, when it was formed, and right after Miss White was given the health message. And so this is what we're talking about. And so the devil comes along, he hijacks it, and he makes us seem like we're half nuts. Now, when we talk about some of the things that we talk about, like, we were just talking about the alligator Alcatraz out there. This is another thing that people have saying, oh, you guys are part of that liberal movement, that's becoming more and more hated all the time, right? You guys are vegans, and now you hate Trump, and none of us hate Trump. That's not accurate to say at all. I think what happens is God has given us a special message to share the world, and that message just happens to involve some of these leaders that have a lot to do with what's going on nowadays. And Tim Grady wants to clarify that is why we are a plant-based diet. We have a plant-based diet. So maybe he wasn't saying exactly what you guys thought he was saying. So anyways, so he's hijacked the message. He's made it a kind of a dirty word, hasn't he? And he's tied us in with these individuals where it's going to be a lot easier to come after us when the Sunday laws are passed. Manuel Foz, I hope I pronounced that right, says Truth Triumphant Ministries has an excellent series on tithing. Check it out. Okay, well, that would be excellent. I am not the expert in any one thing, so to speak. I just talk a lot of, not all vegans are like that. My animals eat meat. My kids eat meat. I do not eat meat, and I don't push my choice on anyone, okay? And Ray says, you're also ignoring things like gluttony. Nothing more gluttonous than taking the life of God's sentinel creations for a couple of minutes off-taste pleasures. I agree, dude. Totally. Race also says, when you are blessed, fortunate enough to be well without doing such things. Again, I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. Manuel says, Keep the Faith Ministries has also an excellent series on the underground church. Hal Meyer. Okay. Yeah, I think I've heard of that ministry, Faith Ministries. Many things in the Bible you have to ignore to try to pitch me eating, and it's most likely the number one thing that the devil corrupted, if such things exist. Many things in the Bible you have to ignore to try to pitch me eating. Not sure what you mean. Trish, that's the way I feel. It's a personal decision. Many things in the Bible, Ray says, we'll have to ignore to try to pitch animal eating, which is likely one of the main reasons the devil corrupted, if such a thing exists. Yeah, well, it does say that man was given meat to eat after the flood. So, and so I think that's what's being talked about here. And then when they were given a diet in the wilderness of the manna, they requested to go back to the flesh pots of Egypt. And so God gave them quail, not the first choice. And many of them died as a result of that. Plant-based, Tim, okay. So she meant that, Tim. So anyways, yeah, there has to be a balance with the diet. Again, if you live in a country where plants aren't, like for example, I mean, there's countries in the Middle East, there's countries in Africa where they literally just raise goats and sheep, and the goats can eat almost anything, right? I mean, they can eat like very sparse vegetation, and they can thrive on that. And so they kill and eat the goats, and so the human becomes more important than the animal in those situations. We live in a country where we have a great abundance, and we have choices, all right? And so balance, there has to be balance. Personal choice does not create victims. A real personal choice is like what your favorite color is or how you want your style, your hair. Well, I mean, respectfully, I say that, the vegetarian diet is something that has become, how do I say this? It's one of the facets of, I believe, the end-day religion. And I'll use that word, okay? So it is a facet of the end day of religion, and it's not something that everybody is going to accept, okay? And you can't force people to do something that they don't want to do, because personal choice, this gets into conscience, of freedom of conscience. You can't force someone to go against their conscience. If someone feels like in good conscience that they could kill and eat that animal, who am I to tell them otherwise, okay? We're talking about the freedom of conscience. That's how this country was born. So I'm not going to support the idea that we just take away people's choices because we have an idealism in our diet and our faith and our way that we do things. Yeah, okay, you understand where I'm coming from this? This kind of bothers me that people think it's okay to tell other people what to do. I'm not telling people what to do. I'm suggesting that this is a better way. I'm suggesting that this is how Christ wants us to live. I'm suggesting that Jesus would have us to do it this way, but I'm not telling people that they have to do it or they're going straight to hell. I'm not telling people that they have to do it because this is my personal beliefs and you have to believe it too. You see where I'm coming from? This is the militant kind of a veganism thing that I want to kind of steer way, way, way away from. And here you're going to pitch something else here. Unless you believe I could force a puppy off a cliff, then you don't really fully believe your own argument. That, you know what? You're way off base, bro. You're trying to group in animal cruelty with the eating of food. Okay, certain animals are raised for food. Okay, people have done that for many, many years. It's not unethical to, the practices of the slaughterhouse are unethical. But you take a farm, you take somewhere where they're ethically raised, it's not unethical to kill an animal and to eat it, okay? Because the life of a human surpasses that of an animal. When you look at the religion of the Bible, it talks about how important the life of a human is because we're made in the literal image of God, right? Now, animals were given to us, but we live in a world of sin. We live in a world that doesn't have everything that the ideal model is, right? Because we've fallen. And so even Adam was commanded to kill the lamb as an example of the death that Christ would have to die on our behalf. I've seen too many pastors brag about their vegan veggie diet while their congregation doesn't know or understand the basic foundations and beliefs of the church, and this is true. Ray says, funny, I hold a consistent position and would protect humans the same. Every one of them would be on my side of this if they were the ones that were about to end up on a plate. Well, yeah. And again, I agree with that. I mean, look, I don't want to take people's position away. I don't want to take people's choices away, because God even gives the individual choice to be lost, right? We don't take people's choices away. We add to their choice addendum, right? So they had two choices before. Now we're giving them a third choice, right? You're giving them something. You're not taking something away, because this is exactly what the devil's trying to do. He's trying to, through this process of legalism, of making everything right, he's actually making everything wrong. Christian Progress says, wow, that's a new one. Any pastors you can mention? Yeah, there's a few out there. I don't know if I'd mention them, but here's the problem, is that they do kind of put the diet above Jesus, and Jesus need to be put in front of the diet. Now, I say that, but here's the deal with that, is many people have been led to the message of Jesus Christ through the diet. Okay, my wife is one of them. She was actually reading the book, Counsels on Diet and Health, and so by reading that book, she was able to fall in love with a diet that actually healed her. And through the healing of her body, she gained great respect for the rest of the message as well. So sometimes people do come into the church, and that's the first thing they hear, and then they latch onto it. So Manuel says, tithing should go to faithful independent ministries that are doing the work. God has left the conference years ago and is in independent faithful ministries. I don't believe that. I flat out reject that, and I'll tell you why. Now, that don't mean that I am not the foremost authority on anything. I'm not the one that's out here trying to, tell you guys how to think, but I reject that because, and I didn't really get a chance to pitch this yet, but the idea behind paying, the church is God's institution, and because there's corrupt people in the church, it's not up to us to just all of a sudden disconnect ourselves from that. That's not our call. That's not our say. That's God's say, because he says he sets up kings and takes them down, right? Does he not care more about the church than he does about the world? I mean, when we read in the Bible about corrupt leaders, they were still told to obey the commandment of the king under penalty of death, were they not? God has anointed individuals to lead. They don't always lead good. We're flawed human beings. And of course, we put all of these stipulations on our leaders. Oh, they need to do this and this and this, and they need to lead like this, and we're always smarter than them, right? And I'm not sticking up for people who do things wrongly. I'm not sticking up for people who do things wrongly. I think they need to be held accountable. I think they do need accountability. Some of this stuff that Conrad Vine brought out was faithful and true. But the reallocation of tithes, it's my opinion. I don't think we should reallocate our tithes at all. I think they still belong to God. You look at what the church is doing and how much money they spend across the world, across the globe, spreading the gospel. And that's the mission of the church, is spread the gospel to the whole world. The three angels' message. Now, we can argue and we could say that the church has failed that three angels' message, but I don't know. Okay, back to the comments. You guys. Carrie, there's no need to kill animals in this day, and there is a lot of great plant-based choices in the beginning. God gave us the responsibilities to love and take care of all animals, not to kill them. No. Well, I know. I want to make it clear that we're not siding with the militant vegan, where they say that everybody has to follow them, and people aren't given the choice. And this is, I don't know if you've seen those videos of people slapping chicken sandwiches out of, people at restaurants, and screaming in their faces and telling them how unethical they are for eating the flesh of animals. People need to be taught and brought up in love. They just can't be like forced, and this is what's happening. So I just wanted to kind of address that personally. Okay. And Bart goes on to say, and take care of the animals, not to kill them, no matter how they are raised. We're supposed to get back to the original order. And yes, that's what God's originally. You're not going to hear me argue with that. Of course, you're not going to hear me argue with that. It has been some years since I have considered the General Conference as the voice of God. Well, okay, yeah, you're going to give me spirit of prophecy. There's spirit of prophecy that supports both sides of the argument. There really is. Anyone who claiming veganism is just a diet is going to have to explain how a vegan not buying a new leather jacket is a dietary decision. Yeah, the leather jacket, there has to be an animal that dies for that. I understand. I'm sure you know, but just in case others don't, veganism isn't a diet. Okay. Oh, okay. Isn't a diet. There are many different vegan diets. Some are bad, some are okay, some are excellent. Yeah, that's true. Yes, some really lack the full spectrum of vitamins and stuff. And I've seen some of the people that eat like this. They'll get very impoverished. Trish says, how many times in the Old Testament does it say, and the aroma was pleasing to the Lord with regard to the animal sacrifice? Yes. Yes, because that represented Jesus. That was a representation of our Lord and Savior. And God did command the animals to be killed and to be sacrificed. Now, this was supposed to be a horrible thing. Of course, it wasn't horrible to the people. They made a merchandise out of it. Henceforth, Jesus turned the tables over in the synagogue because people were just making business about it. Oh, okay, I'll sin today. I'll sacrifice tomorrow. No big deal. I'll just ruin this marriage over here by sleeping with what's-his-name's wife, and then I'll just kill a goat. What's the big deal? Cost me $50. Piece of cake. Okay. All right. So, yeah, and Bart reiterates here. It all has to be done in love, God's love. They will know that we are Christians by our love. That's the way the song goes. Yes, but what exactly is that money going for? ADRA, links to the UN where we can't even say God's name while serving the people we've been called to help. Okay. Yeah, I'm not saying there's not problems. There is problems. There came a time when Jesus' followers had to step away from the temple and put the funds directly to where they would be best served the Lord's work. Y'all should watch why every Christian should be a vegan to honor God and other things. Expand your minds on this topic. Listen, Race, maybe you need to look up something for yourself. Do you have any idea who the Seventh-day Adventists are? Do you have any idea? Have you researched anything about the Seventh-day Adventists? We are the only church in the whole wide world that preach the health message. And the health message includes the abstinence of animals. So please, little something, maybe educate yourself on. Reformation leaders were concerned with if the temple tax had been paid, then if the people would be fed spirit. Hang on, I messed that up. The leaders were more concerned with if the temple tax had been paid than if the people were fed spiritually. Yes, that's correct. Jesus addressed that many times, didn't he? But he didn't dethrone the leaders. That came later, right? Last trumpet, exactly. And there you have it. It's our love. Ray says, yes, I'm aware of the Seventh-day Adventists and all of the conspiracy theories about them. Are you aware of them, though? Not just the conspiracy theories, because, we're a very controversial church. I've likely done more research on all that stuff than you will in your lifetime. Okay, well, yeah, of course. Of course you have. Read the Bible 27 times, too, I'll bet. So, yeah, I'm a little out of sorts tonight. So, had a rough week. I'm ready for a fight. Can't you tell? You can only experience so many people saying stupid things before you want to just really lash out. Yes, are you aware of all the Seventh-day Adventist studies with a need as a vegetarians and the vegans? Yeah, of course I am. I participated in one of them. No one said keep the money for ourselves, but to send it to the missions ministries where the message is being preached. And again, I'm not telling anybody where to put their money. I'm not telling anybody where to put their money. I think we should let the Lord speak to us on that. I'm just telling you what I think, as our examples in the Bible through Israel and how there was many, many examples of unfaithful leadership, and never once was the people told to take their tithes that I'm aware of. Okay, you guys know the Bible pretty well, and I'm sure if there is one in there, you guys will let me know. So, Did you say read the Bible 27 times at least, actually? Well, good. Good for you, man. You know, I don't want to come across wrong, but you run across those people all the time, you know, that say, well, for example, you know, the atheist friend of mine, he says that he doesn't believe in God. I said, well, have you read the Bible? Oh, yeah, read it many times. And I quote something to him, and he doesn't know where it's at. So my patience wears thin with people who claim they have all this knowledge and yet seem to just flat-face reject truth. And so, and there is a great deal of people out there that do that. They're almost have been over knowledged or knowledge to death, and they think that all these conspiracy theories adds up to something substantial. Like it gives them some kind of substantial diet. Like eating pork will add to someone's strength. You know what I'm saying? Eating shellfish will add to someone's strength. I'm speaking to a specific individual. You know, those people who preach that those things, you know, like oysters. Yeah, if I eat the oysters, I'll become strong. I'll have the power of the ocean behind me. The conference was involved in the David Koresh fiasco. Again, truth triumphed. You're going to have to show me that. You're going to have to show me that. You know, I got my gloves on tonight, guys. So I do apologize. I'll be better next week. Just a weird mood I'm in right now. Weird mood. And I'm not sure what it currently be an agnostic, vegan, anarchist, but I was raised on I might currently be an agnostic, vegan, anarchist, but I was raised on the Bible. Okay. Just curious, Race, what religion were you raised as? You don't have to tell me. I do apologize, guys. I'm, again, a little out of sorts. It's been a rough week, man. Amazing Facts is technically an independent ministry. Are they doing God's work? Should we not support them if one feels their tithes would be most used there? Who are we to say otherwise? And I think Amazing Facts would be the first one to tell you not to tithe to them. They would tell you to send your offerings, yes, because that's how they exist, is through offerings, but not their tithes. Manuel, I'll just read the rest of that one. The conference was involved in the David Koresh fiasco. That guy was Branch Davidian, dude. He was not. He was kicked out of the church. I'm not sure how that adds up. Again, Truth Triumphant does a great video on this. The conference is much worse than people think. Yeah, all right. Gary, you're fine, Trish says. Well, thank you, Trish. Okay, let me find the video. Yes, do you have my... listen, I'll watch it, Manuel. I will. I've watched so many of those that they I don't know. They don't really do much for me. But there's my email. Please email me that link, Manuel. Catholicism. Okay, Race. So, and Catholicism I have great respect for. But as you know, the Seventh-day Adventists, we talk a lot about the institution of the Catholics and where they stand. Trish in Progress says, Carrie, I don't think you are out of sorts. It's all good. People are challenging you, and you are responding. So, all right. So thank you for the encouragement, Trish. Yeah, I felt like I've been kinder in past lives. You know, I am a naturally a fighter, and one of the things I've always kind of like struggled with is my anger, and I'm just feeling like that's kind of bubbling up inside of me, kind of a righteousness, indignation. I hope it's not from the devil, and I hope it's not an evil spirit doing it to me. So, I just have to question everything I'm doing sometimes. Waco, 25 years later, True Triumphant video. Okay. Yeah, please send that to me, Manuel, to prophecymontana@gmail.com. I'll probably not remember it after the live, but if you do send it to me, I will watch it. So, I've watched some things on Waco. Honestly, I have. But even the Branch Davidians don't really admit to having anything in common with the Seventh-day Adventists. There are some commonalities. They used to keep Bill Hughes is pretty good, no joke. Okay, Reformation says when we have entire conferences and Germany turning the way of Sodom and our colleges not supporting our beliefs. I said, I know, but you guys are so caught up in all of this stuff. And the GC does nothing. Can we support those actions of our ties? You know, I understand. I really, like, better than anybody really thinks here. I really do understand, like, why the General Conference is really bad off right now, right? Now, I gave the example of my local conference president, right? Ken Norton. I was trying to think of his name. Wonderful man, really, really a godly man. And I saw some of the stuff that guy went through, and, you know, sat in a few meetings and stuff. And I saw, like, the hate that he was constantly getting and was constantly directed towards him. And I know people who are personally my friends that really put a lot of hate towards him. And they made a good argument for why they did it, you know, but then I saw the other side of the argument too. And I was able to see both sides of it. I was kind of in this unique position to be able to do that. And until you are in that position to see both sides, a lot of these decisions that these conference presidents are making, I mean, they're really kind of handicapped in that they don't have good connection to the lay people like we do. Like, we're in the trenches, right? Like, whenever I would work for, like, a corporation, and I've worked for a few, it would always turn out bad for me because I'm not a corporate man. I'm kind of anti-corporate. So this is weird that I'd be, like, defending the church the way I am. And so, because corporations always have that disconnect between the people in the office and the people in the field. The people in the field are out there working their butts off. People in the office come up with these great ideas, so-called, and they want to implement them to people who know better. They want to implement these ideas. I mean, they get together and they conference themselves to death. And it's just, you know, it's just to the frustration of those in the fields. So, Race, thank you for joining us. Great discussion, and I hope I didn't offend you in anything I said. And God bless you. And I think a lot of what you're saying, I agree with. I really do. So, thanks for watching. So the problem is we have these conferences that have a disconnect, I believe. And that's what I saw in the conference here locally. I saw, you know, the argument always was, well, the conference needs to reach down and connect with us, right? And that's true. That's true. They do need to make that connection, but what's wrong with us reaching out to them too, and loving kindness? It starts with our local conference. I mean, there's nothing wrong. I mean, if you guys want to put your tithes to wherever you guys feel like God is telling you to put your tithes, I'm not going to tell you not to. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to tell anybody where to put their tithes. Again, you know, but I do think that the church is very much part of the remnant, and you guys will see that in time. Reformation says, I've seen both sides as well. The church has turned more into a business rather than a religious body. Yes, money is needed to run it, but the focus has turned too much on the emphasis on money, and that always happens. It always does. There's need of reformation, right? Reformation has to take place. Reformation has not taken place in the church recently, but there will be one. It'll happen soon. But listen, we're at the hour-and-a-half mark, and that was kind of my goal to make it. So, again, folks, God bless each and every one of you guys. Thank you for being the best part of Prophecy Montana. Keep Prophecy Montana in your prayers. And if you guys would like any prayers, you guys could email your prayer requests at prophecymontana@gmail.com. So, thanks again. God bless each and every one of you guys. I really do appreciate you guys. And you guys, you know, are quickly becoming, like, pretty much the only reason why I wake up anymore. And so, anyway.